So, hi, it's the 6th of January 2017. It's Epiphany, which is actually traditionally the day in Hungary when you have to tear down the Christmas tree. We didn't have a Christmas tree this year. Anyway, my promise was that I would talk about why I'm so unhappy with the 90-90-90 target and what the UNAIDS has been doing about the 90-90-90. And you will see now the website for 90-90-90. Why is this so weird? Anyway, you will see the website here of UNAIDS about 90-90-90, and also I would like to call your attention to the report of the UNAIDS PCB NGO delegation, which you also see here. This is the website. This is the report here, which is absolutely worth reading. It's a shocking document, because if you look at it, then it's quite clear that very little has been achieved over the past period. That was summed up in the course of this meeting in Geneva. So that's already very upsetting, and it's also clear that it was not the NGO delegation's fault or the civil society's fault at all, but it's just, it's clearly, to me at least, it seems to be the ineptitude of UNAIDS in general, and especially, and once again, I will not make a secret out of this, I think that Michel Sidibé is not doing a good job. Now, back to 90-90-90. You know that this whole target about 90-90-90 was originally designed as an advocacy target, as it was very well explained by one of the doctors, professors at a recent ECDC, EX, European AIDS Clinical Society meeting in Brussels about 6 weeks ago. So this has always been an advocacy target without any real hard endpoints. But you know, originally 90-90-90 means that 90% of all people living with HIV should be diagnosed. 90% of them should be linked to care, which means they should be in treatment. And then the next 90 is that 90% of these people should live with an undetectable viral load. Now, there's a new movement, if you like, or a new proposal by Professor Jeff Lazarus and EATG members, board members Nikos Dedes and also Luis Mendao, which says that we should attach a fourth 90 to these three, which should say that 90% of people living with undetectable viral load should have a good quality of life. Now, of course, this then means that we should define what good quality of life means, but that's not the real point. The real point is that no one has ever quite clearly defined what in case of the 90-90-90, what the 90% of what is it that we look at. So it's a very unclear system, and in order to make it a little clearer and a little more operational, if you like, or operable, we attached, or we constructed, the whole continuum of care, which is also known as the cascade of care concept, around 90-90-90. Now, that concept is not at all new, actually, in healthcare general, or in the assessment of the quality of healthcare. But I will not go into that in much detail now. But this is, similar models have been used in healthcare in order to assess whether healthcare, whether the objectives of a given healthcare system are appropriately reached. But you know, the problem with this is that in some countries especially in Eastern Europe and Central Asia again, and you know that this has always been my favorite topic, my pet horse, if you like, that in Eastern Europe, also to some extent in Central Europe, in Hungary for sure, we don't even have a continuum or a cascade of care. Doctors say that we don't need it. We don't need to deal with the cascade of care because it's working anyway. So they don't capture these data, and if they do, then they don't combine these data into a continuum of care. So we don't have this, you know, this beautiful chart where you can see the breakpoints and, you know, what percent of the estimated number of people living with HIV are diagnosed and how many of them are in treatment. We just don't have these figures. And Hungary is not the only country in Central Europe. Or if we have these figures, then they are not public, so we have no idea how these figures look like. But honestly, if I consider the simple fact that if I go to the hospital and I get my blood work and also I talk to the doctor and whatnot, and I've been doing this for 13, almost 14 years now. When I go there, I have this file, this thick, which is made up from these sheets, which contain all my health data, all my numbers captured by hand in a pre-printed form. So how do you construct a cascade of care or a cohort when data are captured by hand? And maybe I'm not sure. Maybe there's a computerized registry behind all of this, but we don't know. Anyway, but this is misleading. The bottom line is that ultimately we find that no one quite knows what we are measuring. What the 90% of what, and then the 90% of which 90% is it that we're looking at? And how do you operationalize this whole thing? So this whole 90 process or concept has become self-serving. It's like a mantra that everybody keeps repeating without any real content and without really considering that countries are at such different points in achieving whatever targets we're talking about that it ultimately just doesn't make sense, because people are moving across countries and viruses are moving with them, and this system is unable to capture that aspect. So I'm deeply unhappy about the 90-90-90, especially because it becomes even more counterproductive when you keep talking about 90-90-90 in settings which are very far from these targets, and then it becomes so frustrating, like Russia or Central Asian countries, and then it becomes so frustrating that people eventually just give up and they say, well, this is not attainable anyway, so we just shouldn't bother. So while I'm very critical about this, I don't know what the real solution is. However, I think that UNAIDS has just concentrated too much energy and poured too much resources into a concept that's not refined enough, and which is also in some parts of the world entirely counterproductive, and which has never been a healthcare target. It's always been a political and advocacy target. And because it's not a healthcare target, it's also not scientifically underpinned, and therefore I just don't think it will work. So I'm sorry if I sound pessimistic. I think that there are much, much more important things that we need to work in and work around, rather than keeping on repeating the 90-90-90 mantra like I don't know, like this prayer mill. It's just not. It's so self-serving. Anyway, have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow. Stay safe.